yeux de lumière qui voient passer au loin les oiseaux.
So that are definitely not the core questions of human rights, but from Mongolia, one, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Mongolia, Vietnam, Laos.
Turkmenistan, they didn't.
There have been two from Mongolia, right?
No,
One.
and two Turkmenistan.
Two. One Laos? Two Laos? Four Laos. One Vietnam? One. So we have four. One, two. So we have a majority of four people. No, Mongolia, sorry. Like, what is the name of the language in Laos? How do you call the language? Laotic or Laos? The language, the name of the language in Laos.
Last language.
Okay. Already this is too difficult to speak.
But we are speaking Chinese.
Yeah, and this is then actually interesting. You all speak Chinese. I do not speak Chinese. So Chinese would be an option, but I do not speak Chinese, so it's not an option, because I have a special status, meaning I am more important than the diversity of you. And this is actually something where it comes to in a way to not only to the status, but we have worldwide the largest language group, meaning the language that is spoken by the most of the people. I'm not entirely sure it's Chinese or Spanish.
Spanish, not English.
Not English. Not English, not at all English.
The first one is English. Second one is Chinese.
And no, it's Spanish. I don't know, because Spanish is spoken in many countries. It's not only Spain. It's South America. So why is it justified that English is what we call lingua franca? The language that is commonly accepted as an internationally dominant language, even if it is not dominant. If it would be dominant, we would all have to learn Chinese or Spanish, if it in numbers. But there is another criteria, that it is English. It's a historical one. Why do we speak English? Why is it English that is the so-called lingua franca? There had been originally, in earlier times, the so-called lingua franca was Latin. Latin was spoken by a tiny minority of the people on the globe. The majority spoke completely different languages. A small number spoke Latin. And then you have here, I don't know, from Alemannia, it's a kind of German language, to, I don't know, Zulu or something. Many, many different languages. But this small number was so large that it was outweighing the variety. And then you have English. You have still the A to Z, but in terms of numbers, you have here a large C for Chinese, and I should have drawn it in another way. Here, a large S for Spanish. Each of them larger than the English, but not relevant, not the commonly used language. Why is it Z, E, and not Z? You can make a C out of the L, which is the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church had been a world-dominating power, and they spoke Latin. And this was their Latin that up to the 50s, 1950s, had been still used for services, church services, and that is still used by the priests in Rome. No, I mean in the Vatican, you speak Latin. You don't speak really Latin, but the official language, if you want, is Latin. So the dominant power of the church allowed them to dominate the language. That was, people had been moving. The monks had been everywhere imperializing the world. They didn't say imperializing, they said it's a mission. But this was it. Now, what is the reason for English? Where do you speak English? What's native? Where is English the native language?
Countries?
Hmm?
You mean the countries?
Yeah. What does this say? Hmm?
Is it English?
Great Britain. England.
Ireland.
Great Britain, which comprises England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, Northern Ireland nowadays. But this had been the United Kingdom of England. And this had been the dominant world powers. If you go through history into economic history, this had been the better men. The church people had been the better humans. They considered themselves as better humans. And then it had been subsequently first the British and then America. Now, in between, there had been other stories. It had been the Italians and the the Dutch, but it was really getting a world power with the British and the Americans. They have had their special mission, which was bringing capitalists to the rest of the world. And bringing capitalism meant bringing their capitalism and having a strong position on the world market. So this was their opinion, if you want, on we are the better people, we are the better humans. And this is why they obliged everybody else to speak English. They didn't force anybody. Well, they forced some people, but this was not the point. It was, if you want to trade with us, then learn English. And this continued and is still the case, with some exceptions, actually from the Spanish side, Spanish language side, that you still have to speak English if you want to be internationally active in terms of business. There are a few companies they would accept a Spanish leading CEO or a leading CEO from China and say, yeah, of course, if you speak Chinese, fine. We learn Chinese for you. They have the other way around. If you want to make business with us, you are important, but learn English. Up to now, we'll see. But this is the dominance. In a way, it is as well valuing humans. And I feel very bad, actually, that I don't value so much the Chinese being here now, that I learn Chinese. I really feel awkward. Not because I cannot communicate. If I want to get whatever I want, I have my beautiful telephone, which is very intelligent, called smartphone, and that translates for me. But there is another dimension to communication. Respect, small talk, just being able to say something nice to some people. This is what the telephone doesn't really do, or what you do not do with the telephone. So this is, in a way, you can say, not in a way, it is a human rights issue. It's not a serious one. Although then you can think about what is actually serious. We have had already a little bit history here now. So all history gone. And I say we have to, I said it implicitly already, why do we have to look for history? Why is history important when we talk about international human rights law? Why does history matter? The one thing is very simple. because it was defined human rights, Universal Declaration, and the covenants. There had been a system of human rights set up in history after the Second World War. And then in the long run, I said, human rights as such did not play a role in ancient societies. It's only later that we talk about human rights. As rights, the state, the nation state, has to secure the human rights, whatever they are, we'll come back to it later, has to secure the human rights of the citizens. That's important when it comes to human rights law. It is the protection of the rights of the citizens of a state. China is not responsible for what happens to you in Mongolia in terms of human rights. That's the Mongolian state has to secure your human rights in China and here. Because here it's actually only relevant if it is happening to you in the framework of statehood, Mongolian statehood. Others is not relevant for human rights law. Not in the narrow sense. States didn't exist throughout history as the modern nation state. Mongolia, there had been possibly or probably a Mongolian people, but they did not have the state as we understand it today. So, earlier stages, what did we have instead of states? The people did what you didn't do today, in a way, but in a different way. Nomadic people, they moved around. But not individually. You are traveling individually, even two from Mongolia, four from Laos, but well, some of you knew each other beforehand, before you came here, but most of them, even from the same country, you didn't know each other. So, nomadic people means as a collective, as a kinship, as a group of people, you move, you have a chief, but you do not have a state in terms of this entire institutional system. You didn't have a passport. There, it is actually important, the issue of a passport, of being citizen of this state.
Can you tell me one example? One example this kind of people.
Of the nomadic people.
Are the nomadic people? They don't have a regime.
Well, nomadic people, they are just. It starts really with a kinship, with a small group of people who are relatives. No, it's not only your parents and yourself, but it's the parents, the grandparents, the cousins, I don't know what. So it is this larger group of relatives extending and building a group that is looking after its own or her own economy. You have to feed yourself. And this is what you do not on your own, but this is what you do with your tribe. Starting with a relatively small group of relatives, then moving on to larger tribes. You elect the chief, but it's not the state as such. Now you have actually discussions about it, if it's an early state or if it's similar to states, but it's not at least a modern nation state. There is one important reason, or one important step in history that we speak of a modern state, or well, it's one to two. Does anybody have an idea when do we start to say this is a modern state? Think about a nomadic people. What happens with the nomadic people? What do they do? What do you do to survive?
They make that state and become country.
Well, in the early stages, how did people survive? What did they do to get the food on the table? People, mountains, trees. There's grass. I'm really changing. You have sheep. More, of course, one. And you're always in the same place. And what happens after 2 years? No grass left. The poor animals have to starve, and the people have to starve.
And they move to another place.
Exactly.
A place where you have peace.
Oh, you have green, fresh grass. So you move there. Again, up to the point where no grass, no water, no nothing. So this is what nomadic people do. They move from one place to another. And what else? Now they come to this point where there are other people and other animals and land. What they do? Just get them away. Go to war. This was really a kind of a time where you have had different tribes, different interests, and if you found grassland here, yours had been used. Okay, the world population was relatively low, so you mostly found something anyway, but if there had been other people in the way, you just went to war. Now, it's of course very simple, much simplified, but this is how it worked. Up to one important war, I begin to like this connection. So it was the so-called 30 Years' War. 30 Years' War. Because they had been beating up in the larger Europe, everybody had been beating up everybody else. Going about 30 years to war, I don't know, it was not exactly 30 years, it was, I think, a little bit less. And if you are going 30 years to war, what happens? History is sometimes very simple. You're getting tired, aren't you? 30 years war. That's exhausting. And that's individually exhausting, but as well, you lose people, they are dying. And then there had been other things. And then they decided peace. Peace is the only solution. If we don't get peace, we are sitting, well, not sitting, we are in 60 years still beating each other up. And in 120 years still. Because we don't find a way to settle. And it was, or is called, sorry folks, there's always something happening. The Westphalian Peace Treaty. It was simply a location where people had been sitting together and saying, okay, peace, that's the solution, and we have to draw up a treaty, like human rights. We declare it's peace. But what does it mean? How do you declare peace? We're just coming together and say, let's make peace. No fight anymore. Of course not. There are certain terms and conditions. And you define in this treaty, what are the terms and conditions of peace? And one essential condition is said to be the sovereign nation state. So after 30 years, beating each other up, they said, okay, finito, basta, finish, we have peace, but the condition is the sovereign nation state. It's sovereignty. You as state so-and-so can decide and have to decide about your territory. And it is a territory. It's not you as group, and you just move your place and then you say, now we are here. But it is in this area where you have your nation state. And within these borders, you are sovereign, which means you have different states. They are all sovereign. What does it mean? If you are sovereign, and you are sovereign, what does it mean for the two? You can decide for yourself. You can decide for yourself. What does it mean, your relationship? You cannot determine what he does, and he cannot determine what you do. Sovereignty. You are sovereign. You can do what your state requires, but you cannot say you have to do this and that because we like it. That's the sovereignty. Sovereign nation state, meaning independent states deciding for themselves and only for themselves. And that means for the people, for the citizens. Because now you are a citizen. You cannot say, today I go here, tomorrow I go there, then that seems to be a nice place, I go there, and then I go back there. You get a passport. You get an identity card. You get certain rights. You have certain obligations. So everybody gets a different passport. Everybody is citizen of this state. You can go there for a visit. You can be there for 3 years, 5 years, but you still have your passport. You're still citizen of this country. And then you may decide, and that's complicated, sometimes complicated. You may decide at some stage, I don't want this passport anymore. I want to get this passport. I want to change citizenship. I have to learn Chinese now. And this is, as far as I know, it is condition, at least if you want to work here permanently, you have to be able to speak Chinese. I don't know if it's just permanently working here or certain contracts or whatever. This is something you find in different countries in different ways. What it means, what is the requirement of being Mongolian, Vietnamese, Laotic citizenship, changing it. I have to adapt to the rules of my new state. So this is important in terms of the establishment of the nation state, of the modern nation state, with its own institutional systems, with its own citizens, and beginning there, even if it's a long time to go, long way to go, beginning there what? What does it mean to have a nation state? What does it mean to talk about law? Its rights, and obligations towards the state. The state has to secure rights. You can go to the state and say, listen, I have the right to live. And you, state, you are obliged to secure my life, to make it possible for me to live. To secure my life in terms of not being hit by a bus under certain conditions. To secure my life in terms of getting enough food, getting water, health. That's later becoming human rights issues. Now it's very formal, well, not very formal, but it's very kind of casual in terms of what does it really mean to talk about rights and obligations. It had been very different from one country to another. The ways you could claim had been very different. And what it meant in detail was as well very different. What kind of rights do you have? Do you have actually, and this is the other side, Do you have the right, if you move and if you take the citizenship of another country, do you have the right not to speak the national language? Do I have the right to be Chinese citizen without learning the language? Or am I obliged, it's always two sides, to learn Chinese? Is the Chinese state obliged to give me the opportunity to learn Chinese? Having special schools for people moving into the country, special language classes. Or is it just up to me? We said already something about rights. What did we say there? Again, history matters. Why does history matter? One reason is humans, the group of humans who had been human, had been extended. After Spartacus and others claimed the rights, we are slaves, but we claim the right to be humans. After a long process, slaves had been considered as humans, and actually slavedom had not been allowed anymore. If you look at the United States, you see how long it took actually to recognize slaves as human beings. So slaves get rid of the border, get slaves being recognized as humans. Women had not been full citizens up to the 1950s, 1960s in Europe. There are certain rights, or there had been certain rights women did not have because they had been women. Not recognized as human beings to the full extent. Get rid of it. There is a long and complicated discussion about children. Because one thing is always linked to being recognized as human, it's what we have here, it's sovereignty. I am human being and I can decide for myself. I am a slave, but I'm not slave anymore. I can decide for myself. I am woman, but it does not mean that somebody else has to decide for me, but I can, as woman, decide I'm a human being. I have the same rights as anybody else. I am a child, and I can decide for myself. I'm sovereign, Nobody can decide for me. Sorry, there's a bus coming. It's up to you, decide. So you have this decision then, when or is there a limit to the sovereignty? A little toddler, there is this usual thing there, you tell the child, no, this is the stove, it's very hot. Just don't touch it, it's really, really hot. But I tell you that it's hot. If you want to touch it, it's your thing. When do you say, you see the child is going there to the stove, you said it's really hot, you burn your hand, just don't, it's serious. And the child says, well, seems to be something really interesting. Goes there, and in the last minute you say, no, stop. Because you know what is going to happen. Or do you say, okay, I told you what it is. You have this brain, you can know what I mean when I say it's really hot. It's up to you. And this is, of course, a decision as well, not only with children, but to which extent and in which situation possibly can I take certain rights from somebody. If somebody is drunk and you walk after a nice evening and they are just nearly falling on the street, and you know there's still traffic, you say, okay, you don't have the right really to do what you want. I will save your life. And this is one of the decisions where it comes to the discussion, and this is why I said there is another dimension as well where history matters. It's who is considered as being human, but as well what is meant to be human. We make another short break and then we'll continue that.